All right, dude, let's make your first campaign. The first thing that you want is contain it to about 3 hours long. You don't want to make it too long where they start getting bored and doing other things, but you don't want to make it too short where like, okay, that was it. Because you may only play once every couple weeks, maybe once a month. And, it's rare nowadays that you're playing every week or twice a week. People are just too busy with their lives right now, especially with like different prices. So you really want to compact it to about like 3 hours. So I like doing the social, mental, and physical aspect. As you see here, the blue would be mental, the green would be social, and the last is physical. I don't like to do too many physicals until the end. I love ending the night with a physical conflict, and the characters are like beat up. That's how we end the night. The first thing I like to do is the post embrace. 15 minutes. Your sire goes over briefly how to feed, that you need a ghoul, and the reason you need a ghoul is you're not going to be able to hold a job anymore. So you're going to have the ghoul make an income for you. The ghoul is going to have to find you a place to live and watch you during the day. They're very important. Or else you're going to be a homeless vampire on the street begging for money or just killing people for money, which you're going to succumb to the beast pretty quick with that. And that's going to be a very short life for you. So after like the first 15 minutes, then we go into what I call the B plot. The B plot is just the nightly hunger that you have and keeping your humanity up. I consider part of the B plot. So that's going to be like a nightly struggle for you. You use too many disciplines, you're going to have to feed. So each player should have their feeding habits. It's a really good way to establish actions and consequences on this tab here. I'll keep track of the actions that would have consequences throughout the story, and I'll write in like future consequences that it will generate for like future campaigns. For example, one of my characters or one of my players killed an exotic dancer in an act that he was like a health inspector was coming in and there was a dead body in the basement and the dancer just happened to see it. So the player ended up killing the dancer and then killed the health inspector afterwards. So it was meant to be a social conflict that they were supposed to resolve socially, but absolutely they can resolve it any way they want. And they chose to resolve it with physical violence. But there is consequences. You killed a person, so there's going to be an investigator looking for her now. Her family is going to come looking for her because she was killed at her place of work. So she went to work and never went home. Family and investigator, and then for the health inspector, it's going to be noted in his book that he disappeared while investigating this club around the same time as the dancer. So, now there's going to be people looking for him also. Some of the other things they did is that the stripper that they killed, there was a corrupt like a college professor that was like selling the drugs in Baltimore, or he was overseeing the selling of drugs, and the hunters were using the money from that drug trade to hunt down the vampires in Baltimore. Well, they threw the dead stripper like right on top of the CCBC professor in his own home. Haven't you figured out what consequences that's going to be? Because that's just, I'm sure it scared the poop out of this, the professor, and now he has to deal with the dead body. And they killed three drug dealers. They try to take down the network. They threw one off of a roof, landed on his feet, broke his spine, wheelchair for the rest of his life. Kind of want to make that guy like an arch nemesis for them, like just some street gangster that's permanently in a wheelchair now, but he's directing everything behind the scenes. And when they meet him, like Chronicles from now, like this guy, I'm gonna hype him up in stories and how smart he is. They're gonna meet him maybe like months from now, and it's just gonna be a dude in a wheelchair, and he's like, "You're the one who threw me off the roof." Like I think that's gonna be really epic. But after the B plot, that's when you want to go into picking your goal. Like I allotted 30 minutes for that because they have to figure out if they want a physical goal, a social goal, and a mental goal. So for example, let's say like they picked a character who's smart and has money and they're like, I just need someone to protect me. They're gonna want to pick like a bodyguard physical ghoul that can throw down. He might not be smart, he might be suave, but you want him in a fight. Maybe he's got like fortitude too. Once you get experienced, like once the vampire has been around a lot, I'll let the character pick what disciplines the ghoul gets, but in the beginning, I'll pick it, and it's usually just physical. So like the Grand Grill vampire ghouled someone, and he'll have fortitude of 2. Like he'll be pretty tough. Or a Bruja might have celerity 2 or potence 2. So that'll be pretty tough. But let's say you want some political connections. You pick social, then we'll have your character go to some political rally, or maybe they'll be at a bar and there'll be a local not politician but like a politician's assistant or somewhere up high on the assistant status for the politician, and they would take them, and now they have a person in not so much in power, but they're close to someone in power at like the very beginning. Or a mental one, it could be a college professor. It could be a detective, something like on those lines. Usually I'll have like the money being with the social person. So if they pick someone with social, that dude will have money. But the mental aspect, they could have, I mean, medicine as a doctor. They could have money. They could be a like a scientist or something like that, computer hacker. And you have to. I ask them what kind of goal do you want, and then we kind of role play that, whether you meet them at like a bar or a gym, or you would meet them at a college campus, or you meet them at like some sort of political rally, something of that nature. And after that, we'll introduce them to the initial conflict. For my campaign, the conflict is they're trying to stop the drug trade in Baltimore because that's how the hunters are being funded. So the initial plot was them discovering that a CCBC professor was the one who was in charge of the drug trade and funneling the money to the hunters, and it was done by just local, drug lords on the ground in West Baltimore for the most part. And the way I introduce the conflict, I like looking at their character sheets and I'll create the barrier according to their stats. For example, if someone had investigation 3 or 4, like they wanted to be a detective vampire, I'll let them, role play that, and the barriers that will be introduced, they will need the investigation in order to overcome those barriers. For example, one of my player characters had investigation 4. So in order to figure out who was on top, we used the investigation thing. He figured out it was a CCBC professor, and then we role played that out. And he was using his investigation the entire time. And the other character really wanted to own a nightclub. So she didn't really need money and things like that. Her goal was a social goal. She wanted more political influence. But you want to make the barriers that they come across the skills that they have. You don't want to like pick a finance campaign when nobody put any dots in finance. It's not going to be any fun, and that's not the type of campaign they wanted to play. The dots that they used is the campaign that they want to play. So if they want to play a computer hacker, give them computer barriers. If it wants to be like an academic campaign, give them academic barriers. But you want to structure your plot based off their attributes. So, and then the first steps would be figuring everything out, which they figured out. The CCBC professor, the drug lord. The introduction to the A plot is just learning what they're supposed to be doing. What is this story all about? Which in Baltimore by Night, the hunters took out almost all the vampires in Baltimore. It was at 14, a few years before their embrace, and a week before their embrace, there was another huge hunter fight. The vampires got down to 7. So they embraced those two, but now it's 9 again. But there's not a lot of vampires left in Baltimore. So stopping the drug trade is what they are trying to do, which will push the hunters back and defund them. So the first steps is figuring out who the hunters are, how are they getting funded, which they haven't figured out who the hunters are yet, but they figured out how they're getting funded, and that's the CCBC professor and the drug trade. So I put 10 minutes there. It shouldn't take too long to figure out like your first steps. That's mostly just rolling, learning things, rolling, learning things. And this is where I like to introduce a C plot. So the A plot would be the hunters and the drug trade. The B plot would be hunger and keeping your humanity. But I like doing a C plot. So the C plot in our story is the actual hunters themselves and the gang members. So there's a lot of gang violence in Baltimore, and the C plot is just dealing with the gang violence. And this one, they figured out, the drug trade was happening here. They quite didn't understand the CCBC professor yet, but they had a hint on it. So they just went down to the local drug lords, and they had like a little skirmish down there. Bullets, they were learning what they could do as a vampire. They were testing their disciplines. This one should be like short and sweet, in and out. You're just giving them a taste of conflict at this point and introducing them to the C plot. And then planning the end of the first conflict, that's where they learned of the CCBC professor. Um, and they're using their disciplines more. They're planning like a final solution to the conflict that you presented, which would be the funding. And meeting the mid boss should be about 15 minutes. That's where they went to the CCBC professor's house. They talked to him. That's a social thing. And then they threw, the dead body on top of him and then just walked away. They were just making their case known. They didn't kill him right there and then, which was good. And after they meet the mid-boss, it's the end of the night conflict. And on this one, they got pretty beat up on this one. So one of the player characters was again Grill with Fortitude 2. And she had like stamina 3. So she was just tanking bullets and she didn't know why. And the other guy player character is a Bruja with celerity 3. So he was just zipping around, throwing people around. But he would get hit once or twice here and there, and it started adding up. And he didn't understand, why the gangrel wasn't taking damage, so he stopped, got hit with a bunch of bullets, and then figured out he ain't quite as immune to bullets as the other vampire. And she ended up getting so many bullets thrown her way. It was like she just couldn't soak it all, and she was taking damage. But throughout that whole thing, they were shooting back, at the gang members. They ended up taking out like a third of them, and they started running away. That's where he like threw the guy off the roof and broke his legs and things like that. So they ended up getting away. They were both really injured, low on blood, and they ended up limping away from the conflict. And that's where we ended the 3 hour session, which I felt like it was a really good session. I had a lot of fun. I'm hoping they had a lot of fun. Some of the other things I keep track of in this blood, how much blood they have, their humanity. I'll even keep a little bit of notes on their goals, their property, and the income that they make. Those are all very important questions, things that you want to cover because they need a place to live, they need an income, and I like keeping track of their goals. I have their character sheets written here, all their stats. I can even have a picture in there to remind me what they look like. Of course, my actions and consequences page, I have the NPCs with a picture of each one that I generated off Midjourney, their names, just like very short notes if they're a ghoul, what disciplines they have, of course, their race. But I have these pictures that you can make larger and smaller. That way, when you're introducing the character, you can introduce what they look like. But if you're on Shine, you can actually throw the picture in. If you're in person and you're on a laptop like me, you can make the picture larger as you describe the person. And this is the actual story. We finished our first campaign and we're getting ready to do our second campaign. That's why we have like consequences and things like that already. And you see, I go through my social, mental, and physical thing. They're going to learn that their ghouls have disciplines. They actually haven't learned that yet. Ghouls haven't learned that yet. They're going to have a coroner starting to ask questions. They're going to start getting phone calls from like the police because the coroner is noticing things, especially about. I might actually yeah, like they're working with the detective that you can see earlier on, Mortal Detective Noah. The detective is trying to figure out, what happened to, the two missing people that were last seen in the club. They're going to learn about a gangrel, that Nara Hunting Leaf that I covered in a different YouTube video. She actually embraced one of the player characters, but she never introduced herself. And I like, after the embrace, I usually give them like a week of like in-game time to be by themselves, which is just like generally like one session, just a trial and error, everything. The one of the player characters died from the hunters. And then I really want to introduce that wheelchair guy, the gang member, like I was talking about before. They're not going to meet him, but they're going to start getting like phone calls, and he's going to start becoming a barrier with his men and intelligence. And I want to like hype him up for a few sessions and then introduce him. He's the guy that you threw off the roof. He's in a wheelchair now and he hates you. And of course, the mortal detective, that's going to be a social one. He's just going to come around asking questions. Socially, they should just be able to just tell him, to get lost. But we'll see how they deal with that. They could deal with it a mental way where they know the laws. They could deal with it a physical way and just beat the poop out of them. Because so many vampires were killed, there's going to be ghouls that want some blood, and they're going to start coming. They're going to figure out who they are, and they're going to start coming for them, and they're going to have to fight off these ghouls. Is what I have planned. But like I said, just because I put physical, they could use social and maybe take one of them. I plan on having three of them, or they could use like some sort of mental way to deal with the issue. But generally, going to be like three ghouls that want blood. They're new vampires, so I'm not gonna have them be too strong. One of them is gonna be like 150-year-old ghoul that uses a sword, so they can deal with that whatever they want. The election, basically, the Gangrel Nara Hunting Leaf, the local mayor of Baltimore, is trying to take the Native American land. And that's how I'm introducing Nara Hunting Leaf. She has ghouls in the government that are trying to stop that, but they're learning of the election and they're going to try to. I'm introducing Nara the Hunting Leaf as a protagonist in their story that will help them, and they're going to have to figure out how to stop her land being taken from the election, and interfere because, like I said, one of her ghouls works for a local politician that's running for mayor of Baltimore, so they're going to try to get her ghouls candidate elected instead of this guy, which will solve the issue. Next one, these are new people to Vampire the Masquerade, so I'm just going to have like a quick learning about vampires and going over the history and things like that. And the very last thing is they're going to go try to find Nara Hunting Leaf on her Native American land. And that's going to be an issue because she has lots of Gould animals to keep non-Native Americans out. For example, she has beehives that are fed with vampire blood loyal to her, and they will swarm anyone who comes through. There's Gould wolves that can hunt them down, and then there's one Gould bear that can just throw a car if he needs to. The bear has like potence too, in addition to being a bear. He's a monster. I think potence too. I gave him potence too and vitality too. It's like this 80-year-old Gould bear that can throw down. So the task is just getting to her. And when they finally get to her and I introduce her, that's how I'm going to end the next story. So, I mean, you don't have to go completely by the storyboard that I have here. If you have something like this and you think it works out pretty well, you can use this way. Like we have some backstory on, she Gould a politician, so I want to make this a little bit more about politicians. And the mortal detective, the other person is a detective also, so I kind of want to, almost Death Note like Yagami back and forth. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see how that works out.